Hello everyone, welcome to the Eternal Spoiler Breakdown. My name is Pojo, and today we're going to be looking at some upcoming cards that were revealed during the ECQ. Congratulations to Lights Out Ace, who won with a pretty sweet Argenport list, and Collector for second place runner-up with a Skycrag list, all Yetis. That was quite delightful. It was a really fun match to watch, and I hope everybody had a lovely time at the tournament. We are going to be talking about all of the cards that are coming up in the new set. So yeah, seems like we have confirmed that this is going to be a 3-color set. So we we did just see a display released, and that'll be one of the cards we're talking about today. But first things first, let's go in order of appearance. We're going to talk about Dark Talon Wyvark. So, Dark Talon Wyvark, 4-cost, Primal Shadow, Nightmare Dragon with Flying and Aegis. It is a 3-3, which 3-3 for 4 with Flying and Aegis right there. That already is a pretty decent stat line. 4-cost 3-3 is already on par with some pretty expensive cards, I would say. Like, you can get, it's pretty hard to get a 3-3 Aegis for anything cheaper than 4, so this already excels a little bit past what some other cards can do. I believe there is a 3-3 Aegis that exists. There's also a 4-cost 2-2 flyer with Aegis. I believe it's Thunderbird. That it might even cost 5. So Dark Talon Wyvark is already looking somewhat stat efficient for an Aegis unit, which is kind of nice to see. When Dark Talon Wyvark hits the enemy player, they discard cards from their deck until they discard a unit. So it's something like a Fallen Oni type effect, where you are definitely getting a unit off of the top of their deck, and thus making it a little bit harder for them to draw units from their deck. This doesn't hugely reduce the chance that they're going to get a unit, but it can feasibly slow down their turns if they're trying to play tempo or aggression. So it's something notable to talk about. It's not something that I would call card advantage. You aren't getting rid of a card if you are taking it off the top of their deck in general. And this also means that you are guaranteeing that they put a unit into their void, but there is something to be said for the tempo loss, particularly because Dark Talon Wyvark wants you to draw removal because it's actually immune to most removal with that Aegis. So it's okay with you drawing spells, it's okay with you drawing power, and it's pretty happy if it gets rid of the units, because the units are the things that can potentially kill it. Things with killer, things with deadly, things like Scorpion Wasp or Predatory Carnosaur, that kind of thing is just a little bit more likely to get hit. Also, if you're a unitless deck, this card does in fact kill you instantly, which is always a nice thing to be pulling out against a unitless deck on like an Aegis setup, although certainly a unitless deck may be able to pop the Aegis and kill the unit due to its fairly poor stat line. Like, this can be torched into suffocated or something along those lines. It's still something really nice to be having in your setup. The other nice thing about this card, of course, is that it does synergize very well with Tome of Horrors. It has good evasion. It deals a reasonable amount of damage, which means it mills 3 cards naturally. And then it also mills additional cards on top of that, which helps you set up for your Dream Snatchers and other types of interesting setups. Tome of Horrors is a really, really fun mill card. I think it's probably the best take on mill that we've seen so far. So continued Felon mill support doesn't seem too bad right now. There's already a continuing theme in Flame of Zolta of mill that kind of works out, and this card seems like a solid addition to that set. That being said, it is a card that gets most of its value through its mill, so I'm not sure that this is going to be like a high tier, super powerful card. I would say this is tier 3 at best, but like it's got potential to get into a tier 2 Tome of Horrors deck or some sort of other like aggressive type deck that really benefits from that kind of self mill. The main issue is the issue with all mill decks. Deck sizes are very, very large. They are typically pretty unit heavy. They typically do not, the mill decks typically do not have a lot of power focus in general, so this card isn't adding a lot to that. It's still reducing the overall value of units in your deck, so there's a lot of things that can generally become problems, and it makes it a much more narrow deck for certain types of setups. But it's still something that does synergize really well with mill, so if you're interested in mill, this is an interactive and interesting way to go about it, and synergizes very well with a lot of the common like mill stuff that you got going on. Should be a very fun rare to be showing up in main packs, since we assume that it's going to be Echoes of Eternity, draft pack, Echoes of Eternity. You can pick Dark Talon Wyvark as a bomb rare, and then start setting up with cards like Fear Stoker, Raven, Fallen Onis, anything along those lines in draft, and have like a pretty fun time with this card. So solid bomb rare in draft and an okay ranked option. Seems interesting, certainly, but probably not the biggest card that we're going to be revealing today. All right, next up, we got a display. So that means 3-color pairings, which means we'll probably also see maybe some cargoes, maybe some tokens, probably a decent amount of pledge units, and just a general support for 3-color pairings as they go along. So let's take a good, strong look at this card. Display of Menace, deal 1 damage to each enemy, or kill an enemy relic and give relics in the enemy void bound, or sacrifice a unit to draw two of the top 4 cards of your deck, put the rest on the bottom. So it is either a functionally better Devour for 3, where you are selecting cards. That is by far the strongest use of Display of Menace. So if you can situationally get that sacrifice ability, that's the thing that the card is going to be used for most of all, because it gives you high card selection while also allowing you to play around with sacrifice effects, cards with Exalted, cards with any sort of like Devour type effect. That's the real power of this card, and it's on par with many of the other displays in terms of general power. That's something that really, really should be noted as Display of Menace's main mode. Deal 1 damage to each enemy is a little bit more subjective, but can synergize well with Howling Peak Smuggler and a number of other cards that you might be playing in these types of decks. It can play well in some spell damage type setups. It is a much cheaper version of Reverberating Strike, which is already a card that you're okay with having in some situations, and yeah, allows you to do a little bit more interesting stuff in that kind of setup if you're interested in doing so. Should be noticed that red, blue, purple was generally dragon colors in Flame of Zolta. That may not be true for this setup, but that's an interesting thing to note, because this card does not have any particular dragon synergies in this version. It does, however, provide you with some interesting damage to clear out small units, which is something that dragons might struggle with early in the game. Killing an enemy relic and giving relics in the enemy void bound is just a great way to hate on something if you are particularly concerned about it. I don't love it when you have like void hate that's this good, but I actually think that giving relics void bound is probably something that we were well overdue to have on a card. There are plenty of decks that have like a particularly obnoxious relic that you not only want to kill, but you want to make sure that it stays dead. Temporal Distortion, Martyr's Chains, anything with like the big, really expensive relics, you're really happy if you can give that card void bound, and also give the rest of the relics in the enemy void bound. This is a less useful mode, but it does mean that you have relic attachment in your main board if you're playing in these 3 colors, which is something that will have an effect on the meta overall, since Display of Menace's main mode, the sacrifice unit to draw 2 of the top 4 cards of your deck, is much more powerful than it seems, and has extremely strong card selection, in addition to a little bit of card advantage a la Devour. So yeah, solid card. The main risk to it is that it does not have great tempo. Dealing 1 damage to each enemy will typically not give you a lot of board state, and the Devour effect is slower than a Devour, which does make it worse in some situations, particularly against aggro setups. In Control, however, it's extremely strong. You can get an incredible amount of value out of it, and that is definitely something worth noting for Display of Menace. Alright, I think this is probably going to be in a tier 1 deck. It seems very likely, and in draft it's a pretty solid card to pick up, because all of the modes are functional and do very useful things for you in draft, so solid draft uncommon on that front. Alright, now we get into some fun monocolored cards. We have 2 to note. Touch of Purity is the first one, and yeah, let's go ahead. I found the fit to screen button, so hopefully this won't take quite so much time. There we go. Touch of Purity. Give 1 of your units lifesteal, then give a unit, weapon, or spell in your hand lifesteal. This is nice. This is something new that we haven't seen Eternal do before, which is to say we have not previously been able to give a relic weapon or any weapon lifesteal. That's really, really important for a number of different reasons. Touch of Purity's fast spell mode is not a particularly good combat trick. It's kind of fun on big units, particularly I would say Tazbu and Marionette Cross. There's an Argenport deck right now that plays really, really large units and is okay with like basically everything except life, which is something that Touch of Purity can help out with a little bit. But I would say that the fact that this card gives you no onboard state makes it somewhat unplayable as a control or even an aggro card. That lifesteal is really handy, but this card seems to belong much more strongly in something that is trying to do a combo. And for the purposes of combo, you are looking to give lifesteal to a wide variety of interesting things. You can certainly lifesteal a Fenris Nightshade and give yourselves an infinite draw engine that doesn't deal you damage, but the main thing that's really interesting is that if you give a spell lifesteal, the spell does of course deal damage and then still have lifesteal, and if you give a relic weapon lifesteal, then you give yourself lifesteal and all of your spells lifesteal for as long as that relic weapon is out. There's some real combo potential for this card, probably some some infinite combo potential depending on what type of setup you are in, but it's just something to note in terms of the overall value of the card, that it provides you with really interesting combos. I think it's probably like a tier 3 deck card, because unless the combo is particularly insane, and we would have to see the Echoes of Eternity cards to be sure of that, or we'd have to make a very thorough accounting of all of the cards that are currently out, yeah, there's some potential for that, but I'm less concerned with this card's ability to just gain life, and that is technically what it is. It is a life gain card that functions conditionally based on what kind of units you have out and how big they are. So by and large, not an insanely powerful card, but its potential in combo is not to be undervalued, so keep an eye on it. There may be something really wild in Argenport, and who knows, it could make it into a market or even into like a big Tazbu deck for Argenport style. I think that deck's pretty well glutted for slots though, so I find it unlikely that something that gives no board advantage will make it in there. Lurking Raptors. This one's a pretty fun one. Okay, so Lurking Raptors is a 6/6 for 2. Oh yes, and here we go. Lurking Raptors can't attack the enemy player or block. So, number of different things to note about this. At first, it might just look like a 2-cost 6/6 that you need to silence to get any value out of. Similar to something like Big Brother, where you have the ability to silence it with smaller units, or something just a little bit on those kinds of lenses. But on a closer look, there are actually two other things that Lurking Raptors can be used for. One, it can attack sites, which is very important. You can hit any site with this card if you are so inclined, so the unit can be out, your opponent can play a site into it, and I think a very common mistake is that the unit will be out, your opponent will play a site into it, and they won't even realize that Lurking Raptors can attack into it, so pay attention to that, because that's going to be I think the fairly common mistake on day one is going to be Lurking Raptors attacking into your site and messing it up really, really hard. The second thing that they can do is that they can get Killer. Any Killer effect will allow it to set up, so the main one, of course, means that you can throw on some effects like Savagery, Predatory Instinct, and Twilight Hunt, which makes Lurking Raptors into an 8/8. All of those are really, really, really good options, and also enable you to play some pretty sweet Dinosaur Bond strategies. I think this card probably has a place in some sort of set 1 Dinosaurs list. I also think that it'll probably do fine in a set 2 in an Expedition Dinosaurs list. Set 1 Throne Dinosaurs list. I don't know why I said set 1. But yeah, there's some really interesting things that can be done with the card. It's a lot more flexible than it looks. It has many restrictions, the main one being that it can't block. I think that that's actually much more important than the it can't attack the enemy player ability, but combined with silences, a decent amount of killer effects, and of course the ability to attack sites, I think this card's just overall stats for value and general combo potential makes it interesting enough to see a tier 2 deck at the very least. It seems really cool, should be really, really fun to play around with, and yeah, it is definitely a wonderful Johnny card. I really like the design of this card. There's some really cool things going on with it. All right, that leads us to our last one for the day, Nauki Valiant Warrior, which is another one of our 3-cost legendaries with Pledge. Charge, Endurance, Exalted, and Pledge. That's a list very akin to Ikaria, except this is a 5/5 on the ground with, instead of an Aegis, it's got an Exalted, which in Expedition, this will function still pretty similarly, I would say. When a relic goes to your void, play a random sigil from your deck. That's kind of an interesting piece of text. I'm not sure what to make of that beyond, like, okay. Typically, you aren't going to be discarding a lot of relics or having them destroyed, so it's kind of a nice relic weapon enabler, since you can actually do stuff like play a dragon, the 5/2 Slayer's Edge, and like whack something, get a random sigil, and slowly empower yourself that way. Red, yellow, green will probably have some sort of mild armory theme going on, while also setting up for some interesting options in that front. This might be a signal of what kind of color pairing we are going to be seeing in red, yellow, green, but yeah, Valiant Warrior could perhaps give us something interesting in that tricolor pairing. Mastery 10, strength and health equal to your armor. So yes, it does want to pay attention to relic weapons for sure. And yeah, you can definitely get a little bit of an extra bonus based off of how much armor you have. Although, once again, getting a lot of armor makes this mastery a little bit tricky. I'd say that Nauki's general value is strong enough just on the value of its stats that these two minor abilities don't mean that you have to build around it. Like the Charge, Endurance, Exalted, and Pledge are all good enough that this card can see tier 1 play with a minimal amount of relic weapons and a minimal amount of mastery support. That being said, mastery support and relic weapons are both going to be available in the plenties in Rakano, Cambrai, and Praxis, which are your 3 colors in this setup. And this card is nonetheless a really good damage dealer that happens to have a good block option. It can pledge and fix your power, and it has Exalted, which is just an insane skill that has done wonders in Expedition so far. So Naoki seems like it's probably going to be a powerful tier 1 card, even if the bottom 2 text lines are not immediately exciting. And as to what it is that those bottom 2 effects do, I would say that relic weapons slowly building up into very, very large things could be pretty interesting. We might even see some Spear of the Dying Sun decks, which would be just like... that'd be a fun one. And in like a Zolta Arcanum setup where you're playing this card before you're playing Zolta Arcanum, you have a good endurance unit that not only has Exalted to block, but also gives charge and endurance to the next thing that comes along. Even if it dies, like there are some interesting ways to like sort of play around with that. You can sacrifice it on your turn to give another unit 5/5 endurance, charge, and Exalted, which may end up being a pretty interesting thing in its own right. All in all, there's some pretty cool stuff going on with it, and yeah, it seems like an interesting setup. I am not sure about this card's design because it's just very, very hard to grok, but I would be surprised if it doesn't see play in Expedition just for its general value as a 5-cost 5/5. So yeah, hopefully we'll see a little bit of this. It seems like something that could be very, very interesting and do some wild, wild stuff. Okay, so that's it for today's spoilers. We will definitely be talking about more. The community spoilers open up on, I think, the 24th or the 27th. I don't know exactly when, but you'll be able to purchase them for 35,000 influence. If you are interested in sending them over here, we will definitely review them and maybe even do something special for them. But yeah, we'll probably make an attempt at least buying them from the store, but it's definitely just like random, so probably not going to get any of those. We'll see. Beyond that, thank you so much for watching. We will be back with some more Eternal games hopefully very soon. I've got a couple of brews that we are working on, and yeah, should be talking about those and playing some games with those very, very soon. I'm hoping to put something up today or tomorrow. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all next time. Have a lovely evening, and thank you once again. Cheers.